Welcome to this Robin Hood moment. I'm your host, Kevin Thompson, and joining me is my colleague, Crystal Cooper. We're back to discuss Robin Hood's annual Poverty Tracker report, which has brought to light the harsh realities confronting millions of New Yorkers. Between 2021 and 2022, the number of individuals living in poverty surged from 1.5 million to a staggering 2 million, with the overall poverty rate jumping from 18% to 23%. But these numbers are more than just statistics. They represent families struggling to make ends meet, children going to bed hungry, and seniors facing impossible choices between paying rent or buying medication.
That's right, Kevin. Today, we're privileged to hear from two organizations on the front lines of this battle, Grand Street Settlement and the West Side Campaign Against Hunger. Collectively, Robin Hood has been funding both of these organizations for decades. Welcome to the podcast, Greg Silverman, CEO of the West Side Campaign Against Hunger, and Robert Cordero, CEO of Grand Street Settlement. Through your tireless efforts, you're providing not just assistance, but hope to those most in need. Gentlemen, welcome to the show, and thanks for being here today.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
So Greg and Robert, the number of New Yorkers living in poverty surged by 500,000 people between 2021 and 2022. You both serve this population day in and day out. So can you provide a picture of who your constituents are, what are their needs, and how have those needs been changing over time as poverty has shifted? Let's start out with you, Greg.
Thanks for having me on. At the West Side Campaign Against Hunger, we've been at this, right, like many organizations, for 45 years. And the front line keeps expanding and changes. And, this last week I was with one of our volunteers who's a customer, Martina, who, right, she's a grandmother taking care of a nephew who just had a heart transplant. I was at a senior center meeting some Holocaust survivors who can't make ends meet. I was talking to a grad student with a young child, a single mom, right? Like, it's everyone who is a New Yorker. Like, it's just our community. Everyone is struggling.
Right. And these are all people who are struggling to afford to eat, like one of the most basic needs. Robert, tell us a little bit about the clients that you serve and what you're observing in Grand Street.
Thank you, Crystal. The struggle is real. We serve a lot of families who reside in public housing, and we have never seen this level of struggle to address basic needs. Right? It's always been difficult. It's always been a challenge, but everything piled on, from even pre-COVID, exacerbated by COVID. And so people are hungrier that we're seeing, from our babies all the way through our seniors. We're intergenerational. We serve about 18,000 people, from, newborns and toddlers to seniors in their 90s. And we're seeing mental health issues exacerbated, especially with our young people. We're seeing a disconnectedness that's driven by just the state of society that we're in. We've been around 108 years, and we've seen a lot of change, but this is something unique and different.
Robert, I'm interested in knowing, because this is something that's unique and different, and the demand seems unprecedented in a lot of ways, at least in recent history. How is your organization adapting to this? I mean, what are you doing differently in the face of all of this? What stress points, have you had to deal with, in the face of this upsurge of poverty in New York City?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Look, we were founded to serve immigrants in 1916, and we're serving migrants. Recently, arrived migrants in a lot of cases, but it is unique. The lack of support at the government level for folks who are arriving new to the city is striking. So it's left to organizations like ours to fill in those gaps with insufficient resources and with some limited but important support from funders like Robin Hood. And we all know that that's insufficient. And so, there's always been a frayed safety net, but the inability of government to keep up with, the erosion of benefits and entitlements, from basic things like food stamps, like just being able to eat, all the way through how do we get people, safe and decent housing, is something that, we've had to adapt. We are restricted in many ways as an extension, for better or worse, of government. because we do things that government shouldn't do or can't do, right? So we're paid and contracted to serve meals, right? To educate preschoolers, to make sure that seniors are not isolated, to provide housing for seniors. I think the lack of creativity by policymakers and frankly our sector, the nonprofit sector, to figure out new and different ways to address these needs and to target resources, I think that's a major issue. And I know that's why Robin Hood continues to dig and shine a light on this.
Let's get Greg in here for a second. Greg, kind of the same question. What are the ways that you all have had to adapt at your organization to meet hunger needs on the Upper West Side and further north in Manhattan?
Yeah, I mean, right. Like for decades, we served mostly folks on the Upper West Side and north. And, I think in the last 6 years or so, we have upwards of 30 distribution points across 4 boroughs. And, we all stretched and were forced to grow in different ways due to the demand of the pandemic. And whether that be Whiska starting to serve from 25,000 to 80,000 customers and opening up more sites and doing things virtually and literally flipping from purchasing 30% of our food to purchasing 70% of our food while doubling the quantity of food. It's unprecedented, the need, but also the needs of the organizations. And so we've had to transform our tech systems, our distribution models, our entire supply chain, while, as Robert said, right, we got through the pandemic, and then, as you said, like the city and state and federal governments have all of a sudden, in some sense, washed their hands of it, right? I would say, like we had an increased safety net during the pandemic, and it worked. It was proven, the data is there, and then we cut it all, and now the situation for so many New Yorkers is even worse. On top of that, so many asylum seekers who would love to be working, who can't work. It's all about the folks who can't work. So we go to like this sort of back to the government side. Robert said like it's an inability. Governments had an inability to sort of do this. I'd say they've had an unwillingness, right? Like a budget, like we say it all the time, a budget's a moral document. The city and state budgets that have come out, they've pretty much flatlined, at least in the specific, I'd say in the hunger space. Like increased inflation, you can't flatline just in that alone. So it's kind of a tragedy being played out by our elected officials.
How are organizations like both of yours, who are really at the forefront of these sorts of fights in New York City against poverty, what is the next step in that, to kind of get those policymakers' attention, to kind of harness those resources that aren't forthcoming, that have been cut?
I mean, we just got through the budget cycle. So we just lost, right? I can be very clear from an advocacy perspective, New Yorkers in need lost. And so we have a lot of work to do over the coming year, but I can only speak for the West Side Campaign Against Hunger. Like we double down on engaging an amazing community of supporters to support this work so that we can actually do what's needed. And we
it's organized.
Right.
Yeah. And for us, it's all about advocacy. This is the interesting thing, right? Is you cannot exist as a nonprofit social service organization just by being a service provider. For us, the most powerful poverty fighting tool that we have is the one that changed the course of my life. And it was not college. It wasn't, University of Chicago. It was
it childcare, Robert? Was it childcare, Robert?
It was childcare.
You've spoken incredibly to the crisis, the scale of the child poverty crisis, and also the childcare crisis in New York City at this moment. So I'm curious, either from the perspective of wins or lack thereof that we saw in the state budget this year, what are we up against and how do we make sure that those early poverty fighting investments come through for the next generation of New Yorkers?
Yeah, well, we've got to get the child care tax credit back in place and strengthened. It was okay, but you saw what it did. The numbers don't lie. You all did the analysis, but we saw it on the ground level. We met recently with a parent, Dior, 5th generation Brooklynite. She's a young mom on the verge of homelessness. 5th generation New Yorker, right? Her family is a part of the fabric of New York. Well, thanks to our Head Start program, we're able to connect her to job training, workforce development through our benefits program funded by Robin Hood, get her back on track with going back to school. Her son had an individualized educational plan, and now is actually thriving without an IEP label. That, to me, is a major place that policymakers need to focus. It's not going to solve the hunger crisis. It's not going to completely solve the homelessness crisis. But if we want a future in this city, we have to invest deeply in universal childcare, because that is the easiest way for a family to fall into poverty, that where they're locked in poverty intergenerationally.
Greg, I just want to bring you into this a little bit. As you know, a third of adults and almost half of children with families in New York City regularly experience food hardships. But I think a lot of our listeners probably have misconceptions or, maybe a stereotypical sort of image of who is visiting food pantries and the like in New York City. I'd love it if you could just share with us what the profile of that population looks like today, the people that you serve at the West Side Campaign Against Hunger, and what steps you're taking to adapt to the needs of the changes in that profile and population.
It's funny because sometimes we'll have supporters who don't understand the work, right? And they'll come and they'll see people on the line. They're like, that person, they have a cell phone. They can't be hungry. We're like, that person came up in a car and they're picking up that food. Well, you know why? And it's like, yeah, because we give out about 32 pounds of food and they're picking up for their neighbors as well. And there's 64 pounds of food they're bringing home with fresh veggies. You're going to carry that on the subway? And even
right.
Street, you're not going down the stairs and you're a senior. And by the way, on the cell phone, this could be a family's, this is their lifeline, right? This is they needed to engage with their kids' school. Like, people in poverty are just like you and me. Like it's really hard. A friend of mine, an old college friend, came to visit the pantry recently, and he said, what really struck me was I couldn't tell who. I thought that I'd have an image of what people look like. I was like, there is no image, right? It's all New Yorkers. It's people whose jobs are not paying them enough. It's people whose jobs don't have enough hours, right? It's the mom who's showing up with her kid on it, right? Today, still spring break, right, for school. So you're coming to the pantry on a Monday or Tuesday when your kids are out of school, right? And then you're going to go to work tonight. Like, I'm a former chef and restaurant owner. Like,
yeah.
It's people in kitchens being underpaid. It's people who are waiting tables. It is just New York.
Greg and Robert, I want to get back to something you both have discussed passionately earlier about our inability to get to full solutions in a vacuum. How does your organization collaborate with other stakeholders to tackle these systemic issues? And how do you envision these collaborative efforts shaping the future of anti-poverty initiatives in the city, especially in light of these shifts and of the swelling population of folks in poverty?
For us, we're blessed that we're a settlement house, right? We have 39 other settlement houses in the city of New York. I think the few victories that we have had around raising wages for human services workers, around protecting against cuts, it's insufficient, but it's only possible through coalition work with groups like United Neighborhood Houses. At the programmatic level and the service level, I think that I think folks were working together before. Well, boy, did COVID like force everybody in the best way. Nothing like a good crisis to bring everybody together and get real creative real quick. So working with people in creative ways, I don't want to lose that. Part of the legacy, I think, for my career too, is a lot of the things that we did that brought us together, including Robin Hood, was a big unifier, especially with all the grantees that you have. I think it's really important that we continue to have those relationships. For us, it's, basic need organizations. We tightened it up with, City Harvest and Food Pantry, which are like old hands for Greg, but we're newer for Grand Street.
Right.
I think that's interesting. I'm betting, I don't want to speak for Greg, but I'm betting he's doing more social services now than maybe he was doing pre-pandemic, and so all of us, I think we need to support and lift that work up. That's the way forward.
So what you're saying sounds like collaboration leads to innovation. It leads to the ability to scale, to find new solutions. Greg, how have you seen this play out in the food space in New York City?
Yeah, I mean, when I came to West Side Campaign Against Hunger, right? As I said, I'm chef, restaurateur, and I was shocked at the pricing we were getting, and I assumed that other organizations would be shocked as well, and we didn't have separately like the gravitas to sort of get the pricing we wanted. And so I actually went to Robinhood. I pitched this idea, and there was a brand new guy working there on his first week, Wes Moore, sat in on the meeting and said, wait, you want to do collective purchasing? We're going to support this, right? And the team was like, yep, we're in. So we built the roundtable from an initial funding from Robinhood and a few other organizations, and started out with 4 organizations: St. John's Bread and Life, Project Hospitality, Common Pantry, all grantees of Robinhood. And we used our cash dollars to try to save some money in our purchasing. And just by tracking pricing, not even purchasing together, we saved 22% on our food purchasing for a year.
Wow.
And then we started collectively purchasing. Then we started advocating together. We're pushing up the supply chain to drive down prices. Now there's 8 of us who do this together. As a group, we have a lot more power. You know, it used to be there's only a few groups who would speak for what's happening in hunger in New York City. There was like a little table. And in the pandemic, they expanded that table. They brought 4 organizations to the table. And the 4 organizations were all members of the roundtable.
And it equips you to be able to meet the surging need of the moment, right?
Well, yeah, and to drive the change at a policy level, to say like, this is actually how, you know, no one knows better than frontline organizations how to engage and be a part of community. And that's the power of collective action. And I don't think there's any other way forward. If a group is saying we do it the best way ourselves, they're wrong.
Yeah. What is the power of collective action sort of pointing you towards in terms of what the priorities should be for next year's fight in Albany and for the current battle as we still shore up what will become of a final city budget in June? What are the priorities that you're kind of focusing in on as an organization, what you're hearing from the people that you're serving?
I mean, we're hopeful on things related to SNAP at a state level in terms of like the state sort of kicking in a bit of money. That doesn't seem to be happening the way we had hoped. I think we want to see in the year ahead a fully revamping of emergency feeding at a state level, how HIPNAP and Nourish, these 2 big programs, are run, how the food is distributed. We want to see more state product get to more organizations, but we don't want it going through larger regional networks. We want it going directly to organizations so that they have choice of the product. Same in the city. We want to see the Community Food Connections program expand. You know, it was expanded in the pandemic, and it's great, and they've done a lot of great work, but it needs to continue to expand, bringing on not just more dollars, but more organizations, because it's a changing landscape of emergency feeding. It's not just the West Side Campaign Against Hunger, just like Robert said. There's so many organizations on the ground, smaller nonprofits who are being left out in the cold, and big organizations who are all of a sudden doing feeding, like Grand Street Settlement. You're feeding 700 people. That might be small food-wise compared to what, but like you're not getting the resources that you need. Probably, I can guarantee. Would that work?
And the reality is that's 700 people, even though it may sound small, that's 700 people that need to be fed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nope.
Yeah. Look, thank you, Greg. We're subsidizing the failure of policy in New York City. All right. You know, no contract that Greg or I received pays 100% of what's needed, to support human potential, in this. We're looking at, really, for us, it's about moving towards universal. The more that we can move things from kind of ad hoc year to year budget cycle stuff to being universal, to being an entitlement, call it something else if you want, if people don't like that. But we need to preserve and expand universal pre-K. 3K needs to be preserved. Families are suffering. That's the most, it's close to $30,000 a year to provide childcare for a 2-year-old in the city of New York. That's what it costs. And then we need to pay our teachers, our early childhood teachers, who are overwhelmingly women of color in the communities that they serve. They're the backbones of communities. They need to get paid.
Robert, Greg, we should let listeners know that Greg is snapping his fingers and clapping his hands in this room right now.
Equivalent to what they would get at the Department of Education. And if we could get policymakers to to stand and deliver. I think we'd have a stronger New York economically, be more vibrant. We would have, a lot less of a huge gap between the wealthy and the poorest. And New York City should be leading the way for the rest of the world in all of these areas.
That was Robert Cordero, CEO of Grand Street Settlement, and Greg Silverman, CEO of the West Side Campaign Against Hunger. And that's it for this Robin Hood moment. Today's show was produced by Corey Winter. Our graphics were produced by Mary Power. I'm Crystal Cooper, joined by the ever-insightful Kevin Thompson for Robin Hood, New York City's largest poverty-fighting philanthropy. Thanks for listening.